So if confidence is what you know, then I think humility is what you don't know and what you're willing to admit you know. And there's a really good stoic art piece that I have hanging in my house that describes this, where you have confidence is what you know, humility is what you don't, and then that area in the middle to fill the gaps, that's your ego. And the reason why I bring that up and the reason why I'm really excited to review and analyze this podcast episode today is because I recently re-listened to the Modern Wisdom episode with Gymshark CEO Ben Francis. Ben Francis is exactly what it says here on the title page. He is a quiet operator and he's playing for the long game. Now, Francis and Gymshark, basically going to use them synonymously in this instance because Ben started Gymshark when he was super young, like 19 years old. And he has some famous like founder stories of continuing to work at Pizza Hut while he was still building Gymshark. And just some of the virality that Gymshark had in their early days that allowed them to kind of start on their trajectory to ultimately where he became a self-made billionaire at what was the time, and as far as I know, still current, the youngest British citizen to be worth $1 billion. I mean, that's just, talk about proof of work. When you get a B next to your net worth, that's typically not by accident. And the reason why this interview is so intriguing and enticing to me is because of the first word here is quiet, and really going back to the idea of humility, and not to say that just because you're quiet it means that you're humble and have humility, but I think when we dive deep into this episode you'll see some of the just values and ideas and timeless principles that Ben is really personifying as well as explaining to Chris that shows why he's been successful in a market. Like at the end of the day, they're selling gym wear. So a super competitive market with a lot of legacy players in the game. You have the companies like Nike, Adidas, Reebok, etc. But Gymshark's a fairly new company. Yeah, I don't know the exact number of years it's been in operation, but it's a fairly new company. It's a British company, so it doesn't have the like pull of a Nike that has all these American athletes. What Gymshark has been incredibly forward thinking on is actually partnering with influencers and online social media influencers to help get their brand out there and get people to purchase their clothes. And I am a avid wearer of Gymshark apparel, specifically their shorts, as well as a few pairs of their pants. And like, they're incredible. They're just as high quality as some of the most expensive brands in the space, whether that's a Lululemon or a Viore, which I'm, a fan of as well. But what's cool about Gymshark is I feel like I know the founder now because of this interview in a almost twisted way. Just you get the sense of the type of person he is and the type of business that he runs, and he going back to this idea of the circle up here of humility is what you don't know, confidence is what you do know, and then ego filling in the middle. He talks exactly about that, and what really came to light from this conversation is how Ben is able to put his ego to the side to help him achieve his long-term goals, right? So let's just say his long-term goals, paraphrasing, is to make Gymshark the highest, most valuable apparel brand in the world, or at least the athletic apparel brand, athleisure, right? So he wants Gymshark to succeed and be the biggest brand in the world. And he talks about the importance of relationships in that process. Now, he started Gymshark when he was, I believe, 19 years old, and was the CEO and co-founder for a few years. And then once they started to grow, he actually stepped down into a different leadership role, but not the CEO role. And that just was something that is so like incredible, because you when you think of some of the greatest like entrepreneurs of all time, and specifically founder CEOs, like that is something that you don't see them let their company be like quote unquote taken away from them. Like Steve Jobs famously was pushed out of Apple, right? Like you have Zuckerberg who's still running Facebook. You had Bezos who was running Amazon for so long. But what Ben Francis did, and obviously those other companies are tech companies, and this is an apparel company. But what Francis was able to do was realize that there was so much that he didn't know. And he was, again, super young, and he was on the cutting edge of this athleisure, internet, like drop shipping type of business where they're selling clothes all over the world. And they're really playing on a lot of trends. And he understood that in order to get Gymshark to the level that he ultimately wanted to go to, and that's one of the things that you could tell from like his interviews and from what he is sharing in this specific conversation with Chris, is that he wants Gymshark to succeed more than anything. So he's willing to put his own self-interest to the side in order to do that. But what's great about it is that is aligned with him. So he's talking about how he can put his ego to the side. And if he weren't to do that, then he would have either been getting in relationships that weren't long term. So he is clearly thinking from a more long term ROI perspective, and not just what's in the best interest for himself in this very moment. So clearly able to uh, uh, delay gratification, which is important in business, because it can be hard when you're not when you're trying to get wins on the board, and you're trying to prove yourself and grow, etc. But he also talks about just the importance of like having good relationships with people, and having sustained relationships. Gymshark, one of their biggest partners is Shopify, which I think I want to do an episode on the Shopify founders and their story at some point. I need to find some good interviews with them, because Shopify is like one of the coolest businesses out there. But a little bit of a tangent. But so he was talking about Toby, who's one of the co-founders of Shopify, and just how he's like a genuine good person. And I think a lot of media and culture, TV shows, movies, etc., kind of play on this idea of cutthroat business, where I've talked about this before, but like the idea of a zero-sum game. So if I win, if I get a positive, then that means you are getting a negative, and at the end of the day, it comes back to zero. But he talks about this idea of positive-sum games and positive-sum relationships, and he's really just diving deep into the importance of relationships and into the importance of connection, because just stepping back from like what he knew versus didn't know in his role as the CEO of the business, he understood that if he was able to take a step back, then he could bring people in that could guide him and teach him the right ways. He could be a student and like still have a front row seat into what he believed would create the success of the brand, while also bringing along other people for the ride. So it became this like flywheel, is what it seems like, where he was able to learn about some of the things that he wasn't necessarily skilled in, whether that was around organization and just business administration, finances, whatever it may have been. And he was able to really just focus on what he was good at, so the creative side, the marketing side, while getting like this boot camp, not having to go back to school to do it. So I just see so much of myself in that, because I know that there's so much that I don't know, but I also wanted to get into the arena, because the only way to really get that experience is to immerse yourself. So he fully immersed himself. He famously quit his job at Pizza Hut. I think it was like, I don't know, 6 months to a year after he started Gymshark. So he was working two jobs, but he immersed himself to get into the room to be with people that is what he determined as better than him, right? So this idea that comes from Tony Robbins, the proximity to power, is clearly a principle that Francis is very aware of, and trying to curate for himself, because he knows that these small disciplines compound, and then once you start to see the growth, that's where the magic happens, right? So it's something that, like I said, you have this idea from culture and media that people are cutthroat and out to get you, but then when you actually are working in a business and service that is providing value for people, then you can create positive sum relationships to where you can grow together. And that proximity to power just continues to attract more, and it continues to attract better talent, because you're around people who you're learning from, and then ideally they're learning something from you, because you're just a consistent student. You're always a student. You're literally going through the experiences together in order to build on it. And I think that's just a really important piece to the growth of Gymshark, because he's talking about, in with Chris, of like the different phases that the business really goes through, and the different like kind of levels of reaching scale. This was really helpful for me to listen to as an outsider perspective, working in a startup type culture in a industry that is, really finding its footing, referring to the Bitcoin and freedom tech industry, of how to make freedom investable, as well as how to make it accessible, right? And using different technologies like Bitcoin and sovereign AI and privacy focused tools to reach that next level. So I'm looking at it at like hearing his experience and how he's talking about the growth, and it resonates on the earlier stages, right? Of like when there's peacetime, there's wartime, there's scale. And given the state of the market right now, especially in the Bitcoin world, it's like, all right, like let's get to building. Like the bear market is for building. Like you got to build in order to provide value. People want to see the proof of work, right? Like proof of work, that's where everything happens. And what I always say is, I think you should always be in that mindset. And maybe that's just because of where I am in this current season of my life. But I like to say you have a bear market mindset. So bear market is when the prices or the like market is not operating in the way that you ideally would like it to be. So bear market mindset, but bull market vibes. So you go to a bull market, that's when everything is going right. That's when you're growing. That's when you're making, you're providing and giving and receiving value. And these things go back and forth. And that's just the nature of markets, right? That's the nature of how business works and how free markets work. But you can always have at least the bull market mindset. So it's interesting from him talking about like peacetime versus wartime versus scale. And I think from like an operational, like business perspective, sure, I totally resonate with that. But from a mindset perspective, I know what side I'm choosing, and that is going to be bull market. And I think that's what's really fun about listening to Ben and Chris talk through a lot of their experiences, is like they understand the hardships that they had to go through to get to where they were. They understood, the risks that they had to take, and the kind of stories that they tell that looking back seem super romantic, of like sleeping, on sleeping in a cold home because you couldn't afford heat that month, or risking it all on like a single event to try to force your business into success, right? Like that's the stage that they're going through, and that is what it feels like in going living in this world of entrepreneurship and startup lifestyle, because every day it feels like a different kind of uh, outset and output. Like it just is what it is. Some days you feel like you can't miss. Some days you're in a flow state, like, and those are the best. Like you're just flowing, you're building, you're shipping, you're getting positive feedback, you're getting valuable feedback. Um, but then there are days where it's like I can't do anything right. I am struggling to get answers. I think I have the right answers and they end up being wrong, or I made a mistake or a typo. Just like small things that add up and add up and add up, and it becomes uh it becomes an adventure, and it's a lot of fun and hard, but it's also, again, that's the season, right? And what's cool about hearing Ben's experience of growing the business and stepping back and being able to see the business from a different perspective and then come back into that CEO role. Because I don't even remember if I mentioned that. So he's now back at the CEO. So he's like back in the driver's seat. He basically went to business school for however many years it was, learned all these things, and now he's the right person to continue Gymshark's growth. So he's going through all these growth periods, and he ends up returning as CEO, and it's like this is his company, this is his baby. That's why I say they're synonymous together. Like Ben and Gymshark, they're really just two of two of the same sides of a coin, right? Like, and I think that just really helps kind of let the Gymshark brand also morph into what it's become, because on the early days when they were very influencer focused and social media focused, Gymshark had a really specific brand that people would think about it. They didn't put it in the same kind of category as a Lululemon or I don't Viore that has popped onto the scene, or even Nike, right? Like they were seen as kind of a more at least my perspective, it was more of a like very gym bro brand. It was very like lift heavy, kind of hardo type vibes. And not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that's not necessarily mass market. But now when I see Gymshark, I really do think accessible. I think part of that is the price. I think it's super fair priced, and the quality is high, but it's also the way that Ben, their CEO, as the face of the company more or less, has really pivoted the perspective, because it does they are resonating, and they are providing uh, a kind of vision that is one that I, as what I would refer to myself as kind of a regular dude, would like to associate with. And that is ultimately where you see their scale come into like reach the mainstream. And like it's funny because they've continued to grow, and they're talking about the success throughout uh of all the money and all the places that they've traveled and all the experiences that he's been able to done and been able to do, and fulfilling his dream, right? Like making Gymshark. I mean, it's the biggest. I don't know what, I guess Reebok is the only other UK brand that I could even think of that's athleisure. And they've been pretty. I think they recently got bought, right, by Adidas or something. I could be wrong. Somebody would have to fact check me there. But either way, so they're the biggest brand in the UK, and he's the youngest like billionaire to be on the planet as a UK citizen. So he made it. He made it. But he references this Jim Carrey quote where he says, "I wish everybody could get rich and famous and have everything they ever dreamed of, so they know that that's not the answer." Right? That's not the answer. And this is a theme that I like how Chris Williamson talks about it, and I'm going to continue to share his podcast episodes because he, I think, does it better than anyone talking about this type of idea of what he describes as unteachable lessons. So they're unteachable because you need to experience them in order to actually understand it, right? So I've talked about this idea of uh, Vidya and Gyan in a previous episode with Dr. K. And this would be this idea of getting rich and famous uh, is like, we know that money doesn't buy you happiness. We know that from all of these rich and famous people that are miserable and that say that they would trade it for whatever, like the just they're these billionaires aren't happy, right? So we know that's the case, but yet there's still something within us that strives for it, even though we know. And some people know, not everyone, but most people would say, well, if I had, $100 million, like that would help. I mean, my favorite is just to quote Naval here too, just to like kind of bring it all together is having more money will only solve your money problems, right? Money doesn't solve all your problems, but it solves all your money problems. And a lot of problems, big problems, are money problems. So it helps, but it doesn't help everything. And we're still looking for that purpose, that connection, that human interaction. I think that's part of the reason why, like, granted, like things like democratic socialism is taking off in the country because people are LARPing that they don't want the money and the fame, but they also know, like, we've been told so much that it's not money and fame. So it's like, okay, what am I missing? So if you make everything free, then it solves all your money problems, but a lot of problems will still exist. So it's just flawed thinking. But the reason why I say that is because Ben and Chris continue on this thread of what actually makes you happy. And what's cool about the timing of this podcast is it's like right after Ben had twins. He just had two kids. It talks about how that changes his life, and how he is really adapting as a new father to this reality that he lives in, where he needs to provide for his kids, and he needs to give them an upbringing that's going to be very different than his, because he was a working class family. And I think role models have been something that I've really sought after and have done a good amount of thinking on, because just to write it back up here again is like that idea of proximity to power. And I don't mean power uh in terms of like decision making power, like political power here, or even like company power, like CEO. I more mean power of like traits and skills that you want to be around. So somebody who is a super connector, somebody who is a great public speaker, somebody who just has a really good business mind of like how to strategize and operate and build systems, etc. I think that's what I look for when I'm looking for a role model. But there's other things too, right? It's like, how do you present yourself in conflict? How do you connect with strangers or connect with somebody that you disagree with? And yes, of course, everyone needs a role model. And what's nice about, like, just from a perspective of using Chris and Ben as a role model here, is they are not hyping it up to everything that it needs to be, but they also have that humility, bringing that idea back of like understanding why we go through those trials and tribulations, of understanding why you will suffer to to make your company succeed, and put in the work to basically force success, not taking no for an answer. But that especially when this podcast came out, I think there was a real gap in the market of role models, right? And like, who are we as a society to say who's a good and who's a bad role model? Well, it kind of is like this idea of a free market, coming back to it, like the cream will rise to the top. And what's unfortunate about, let's just call it, the years 2017 to today, is there's been because of that gap, there's been some really negative role models that have risen to prominence because they say things that on the surface like sound really good. This idea that everybody needs a role model, and Ben wants to be a role model for his kids, and he wants to bring his kids up in a way that is going to provide them value in a situation that is like so vastly different than what he had, because he grew up, poor, and his kids are going to grow up as the sons of billionaires, right? Like that's just a naturally different one. And he talks about how he's had conversations with his wife on like how they want to school the kids and where they're going to raise them, and choosing England and why he chose England. And it's interesting. It's a really unique perspective from somebody who has been able to experience the world and thought that he wanted some things and ended up changing his mind, and he's playing in like this very different like atmosphere that he never had the opportunities to. So he doesn't want to like make his kids just like suffer for no reason, but he also doesn't want them to have no purpose, because at the end of the day, if we know that this unteachable lesson that they're going to want to get rich, but they already are rich, then like, what is that purpose, right? Like, what is the mission, and how do you instill that as a father and a role model to help people find what they want to do? And I don't know the answer to that. And I mean, I'm sure Ben is on a journey every single day trying to find it. Um, and I think that is like all of us to an extent. And the gym here, like again, he's just talking about Gymshark as a business, but they're kind of one and the same, because you could say anything. You're in the blank, right? You're in the blank because you want to get better, you want to improve, and you shouldn't tier someone's goals against somebody else's, because everyone's goal is equal. So it's like, how do you accommodate? How do you provide value for your customer in a way that is equal for everyone? Because some people are going to have different goals, and just because one goal might be more ambitious than another doesn't mean that it's better, right? Because everybody's improving incrementally, and that growth becomes incremental, and then it starts to compound, right? So like, if you're thinking of compounding, and I love the idea of compounding, is because you can start with a small goal, but then if you just continue to stack and stack and stack and stack and stack, then it gets bigger. It gets a lot bigger, and that's allows that difficulty adjustment that I've talked about before, and this idea of compounding growth. It increases. So everybody wants to develop. Everyone's goal is equal, like he says. But how do you draw that line, and what does that mean in practice? Like, what does that mean as like as an operator? What does that mean as a human? Like, I respect the person across from me, and that's kind of like just the level set. I'll start with that, and then from there I can determine how I want to proceed, right? And I think that's a fair way to go about any kind of decision, especially in the realm of improvement and goals and business. Is like, you give everything a fair shake, you try it on, you see if it works, and if it doesn't, then okay, you're on to the next thing. And like, there's this idea that I was talking about the other day, of like a two-way decision versus a one-way decision, or a two-way door versus a one-way door. So a two-way door is like, if I, you know, put out a clip or an episode, then I can delete it, right? Like, maybe it gets interpreted in a way that I didn't think. Maybe it comes across as a little bit different than I expected, but it's a two-way door. So I can go back, right? Like, it won't matter. Versus a one-way decision is like a tattoo, right? Like, once you get a tattoo, it's kind of there. It's hard to remove it. You build up a lot of trust from these one-way decisions, because if you are constantly going back and forth, and you're going against your word, and you're doing things that become like deceptive, or you're lying, then you're going to lose that trust. And that is the most important thing, like they talk about, and I was talking about at the beginning, like everything's built on the back of these relationships. And how do you nurture and grow these relationships to succeed in the long term? Because if you're not if you're not focused on the actual human and on providing value, then like you're going to get caught, you're going to get exposed. Because the proof of work ultimately, especially when you're building in the open, becomes undeniable. It just is. It's there. It's what it is. So one of the what I kind of want to end on here, um, as you begin to understand Ben's story, you begin to understand how he's operating Gymshark in a lens of like long-term sustainability, of honest growth and honest work and providing quality good value. Is obviously you're going to run into trouble, you're going to run into problems, and it's going to be hard. It's never going to be just like smooth sailing, even if it seems like it is from the outside. And Ben talked about a conversation that he had with his father when he was a kid, where he did run into some sort of problem, and he thought that his dad was going to console him, right? And his dad just said, "What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it?" And this is a very masculine response that is required, because even if it's something as small as like, the kid on the playground stole my ball, right? Like, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to respond? Are you going to let him just take your ball and you're going to go home? Are you going to fight him? Or can you find a compromise? Can you build a connection, right? Like there's obviously a lot of different ways to go about these scenarios, but it is the key question that we have to ask, of like, when you run into a problem, are you just going to outsource it? Are you going to just disregard it? Or can you find a compromise, or something shades in between and in the middle? I mean, there's no necessarily right or wrong answer, but there is a way to approach it that uh, I think has a lot more staying power. It has a lot more self-respect, as well as respect that is uh, demanded by others and earned by others. Like, at the end of the day, when thinking of what are you going to do about it, you could ask yourself that about any problem that you have in your life. And some things that you can control and you can adjust, and some things you can't. So if you can't control it, then of course, like, don't don't white knuckle your yourself into like trying to force something that's just impossible, right? Like, you can't. You're not going to be able to change the weather. You're not going to be able to impact other people and how they go about their business, but you can change your response to it. And I think that's really important when not only building a business, but operating in the sense of relationships, because um, it allows you to build trust. Like I said, it allows you to uh, uh, compromise and collaborate. Um, it allows you to just like think long term. And at the end of the day, if you're trying to build a lifelong business and a lifelong relationship, then you need these two things in order to sustain it. So what are you going to do about it? How are you going to nurture that and curate that? And I think that's a really profound question to leave off on, because at the end of the day, there's no right or wrong answer. So just pick one and go forward with it. Like Matthew McConaughey says, like, don't half-ass it. Just go for it, like full steam ahead. And with that, then you can find whatever your path is, and you trust it, and you continue to build towards it. So I think that's where I'll end it off here. Again, this was a really fun episode to listen to. Really cool business. I'm a fan of Gymshark, and what they've built. And I think that having entrepreneurs like Ben Francis, it provides a sense of just positivity towards the future because I like how they go about their brand and what they're building, and how they treat the customer with that. So, um, this is definitely like just timeless practices and characteristics and traits that we can all use, to help us move towards any goal that we have, regardless of how big that goal is. So, with that, I want to thank you for listening to this week's Timeless Practice. If you have any other podcasts that you think would resonate, I am always looking for recommendations. So, send them my way. Comment on this video below. And I'm looking forward to the next Timeless session that will be coming out next week. So, cheers and have a great rest of your day. And I will see you soon. Aho.